Thanks for joining us on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Julie Fine, I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington as we bring you an important conversation from the nation's capital. He's just back from the airport. The senator from Texas, Ted Cruz, Republican from Texas, is with us here live and in studio. It's great to have you in the flesh, Senator. Thank you for joining us again on Bloomberg.
Joe, Julie, great to be with you both.
Happy day 20. If it's happy, maybe it's not. But I have to start with you here on the shutdown because, of course, that's the talk of the town right now. And having just landed at the airport and having presided over a committee that involves the FAA, I keep hearing questions from people who ask, how long can the air traffic control system, can the FAA function effectively in a government shutdown? And I wonder for you, does the answer determine when this shutdown will end?
Look, this shutdown needs to end, and it needs to end now. We're going to vote today, I think, the 11th or 12th time to reopen the government. The Republicans are all aligned. I'm going to vote to reopen the government. What we've seen over and over again is the Democrats keep voting to keep the shutdown going, and it's irresponsible. And, you know, I was at Houston's Hobby Airport a couple of days ago. I did a press conference there where I pointed out there are 50,000 TSA agents right now who are working with no pay. They didn't get a full paycheck in the last pay period. There are 14,000 air traffic controllers who expected to come into work, but they didn't get a full paycheck. And this needs to end. It's not right. It's not fair. And I think Democrats are holding not only the U.S. government hostage, but holding the American people hostage. And we're already seeing delays climbing. And I got to say, every day this goes on, I think we can expect more and more of that. At some point, the Democrats need to take their Trump derangement syndrome and set it aside and let the government open.
Senator, I do have to say, though, you just talked about Americans who are waiting on this. Some Americans likely aren't concerned whether it's the Democrats or the Republicans who are responsible. So for those or those not getting paychecks, you know, what do you say to them after this has gone on for so long?
Well, look, one of the challenges in terms of predicting when this is going to end, before you and I sat down, you asked, all right, when's this going to be over? And I said, I don't know, because in many ways the two parties are living in parallel worlds. And I think for the Democrats, they're in an echo chamber where they're listening to their left-wing radicals who are happy. Look, last week, it was conventional wisdom in the Senate that there was no chance the government would reopen last week. Why? Because the so-called No Kings rallies were going to happen this weekend, and the Democrats were terrified of reopening the government before they saw the radicals. And the phrase I kept hearing was that Chuck Schumer was afraid his head would be on a pike. Metaphorically, not advocating violence, but he was afraid of his own left-wing radicals. Right now, listen, the way this is going to end is it's going to take 7 or 8 Democrats saying, all right, this stunt's gone on long enough. Let's end it. And the reason the government is shut down, it's a very simple question of math. In order to fund the government, under the Senate rules, you need 60 votes in the Senate. There are only 53 Republicans, which means we need at least 7 Democrats. The reason the government is shut down right now is the Democrats are voting party line, all but 3 Democrats. Three Democrats are voting with us to reopen the government. Everyone else is voting no. Until the Democrats give us 7 or 8 votes, the government will stay shut down. And I don't know if that's a day. I don't know if that's a week. I don't know if that's a month. But at some point, this stunt needs to end.
You wonder if we get as far as Thanksgiving. That CR was dated for the 21st, but that's the big travel week I had in mind when I asked you that. You mentioned No Kings. Pretty incredible optics from over the weekend and the number of cities involved. We're told that it was some 7 million people. And I know that there was a lot of talk and concern ahead of these that there might be rioting, that violence could break out. Were you encouraged to see them be peaceful?
Listen, I was glad that there were not significant acts of violence. That's certainly a positive development. We've seen other rallies, the Black Lives Matter and Antifa rallies that turned into violent riots that resulted in a lot of people being injured, stores looted, police cars firebombed.
During COVID.
During COVID. So I was grateful that these did not play out that way. I got to tell you, the total number there, I'm a little skeptical about. I think those estimates are coming from the organizers, and we've at least seen, you know, up in Boston, Massachusetts, Elizabeth Warren tweeted out this incredible video of a ton of people gathered and said, look at all the people that came out for No Kings. The only problem is the video she sent out was from 2017, not from now. So I'm skeptical as to the numbers. I'll tell you, though, look, what I have been laying out, this protest was not organic. Actually, my podcast today, I do a podcast every week, Verdict with Ted Cruz.
Yeah.
Today's podcast is actually bringing the receipts that these protests, they were not organic. One of the things that was striking is they were almost all old white people. They're basically boomers in mass, which was fairly amazing. But this is also bought and paid for. This is AstroTurf. And in particular, George Soros. I lay out on the podcast how George Soros' foundation has given millions to Indivisible, one of the lead groups organizing these protests. And this is bought and paid for in a way. Look, these protests are really expressing the Democrat rage. We hate Donald Trump. And sadly, that's who today's Democrat Party is in Congress.
So, Senator, if you're saying they're bought and paid for, I mean, do you think this is something, though, Republicans need to take seriously? If you remember the beginning of the Tea Party, when that wasn't necessarily taken all that seriously. So how should you approach these?
Look, unquestionably, we should take political peril seriously. Number one, I think it's bad for America when one of our two major political parties has gotten so extreme and radical the way the Democrats are. I mean, they're a party that is unified behind hate for Donald Trump. But number two, politically, in terms of the midterms in 2026, it's dangerous. And I'm telling my colleagues, look, if the election in 2026 depends on results, I think we have a lot to campaign on, whether it is securing the border and seeing illegal border crossings drop 99%, whether it is ending wars and President Trump negotiating the deal to release the hostages that Hamas had taken, or whether it is the economy and the record amount of money being invested in new factories and new jobs in the United States. I think substantively, Republicans have a lot to campaign on. That being said, and you're exactly right, Julie, there is a lot of energy, there is a lot of anger on the left, and elections can be dangerous when one side is mobilized, is angry. I'll tell you, in terms of fundraising, the Democrats are raising a lot more money because their radicals hate Trump so much. And look, angry, energized voters show up to vote. And I do worry about just ordinary voters who are happy or complacent, who say, gosh, Trump won, things are good, I don't need to show up and vote. There's no doubt if one side shows up and the other doesn't, that leads to a bad election.
Well, I know that you're very concerned about political rhetoric in this country and political violence. The comments that you made following the suspension of Jimmy Kimmel made some pretty heavy rounds because you were seen as a bit of a contrarian in that case. And you've got a piece of legislation, a jawboning bill, that's up before the Senate right now. Is that, you look at the different ends of the political spectrum and they come around eventually. Is that a different version of a no kings bill?
No, look, I think it's very different. Let's be real clear. I believe in free speech.
It was Donald Trump, though, who led to Jimmy Kimmel coming off the air, and you were the one who called him out for it.
Well, to be fair, it wasn't Donald Trump. It was Brendan Carr, the chairman of the FCC.
And I realized there were ratings issues and everything else. But do you see the connection I'm trying to make?
Yeah, listen, I disagreed with Brendan Carr's comments, and I actually did an entire podcast laying out that government should not be threatening to strip the license away from a media outlet to remove someone they dislike. Now, to be clear, it wasn't Brendan Carr who invented this process. During the Biden administration, the Biden FCC was talking about stripping away Fox News' license. And by the way, I led the fight against that. I'm the chairman of the Senate Commerce Committee, which has jurisdiction over the FCC. And I led the fight to say, no, just because you don't like what Fox News is saying, the federal government doesn't get to strip their license away. And so when this FCC mentioned that as a possibility, I thought it was important to say, look, government should not be in the business of censoring, whether I agree with the speaker or not. And so I'm introducing legislation, jawboning legislation, that would, number one, make it illegal for the federal government to do what the Biden administration did widely, which is pressure private organizations, pressure big tech to engage in censorship. But it also will create a right of action, an ability to sue if the government pressures, if the government jawbones big tech or a media organization to censor someone, it creates damages or a right to seek damages for someone who's been censored, because I think we should protect free speech whether we agree with or disagree with the speaker.
Well, it's interesting we talk about licenses, too, and of course that's a pretty small slice of the media landscape, the political media landscape with cable news and everything else going on right now. But I have to ask you about NASA. We're spending a lot of time on your Commerce Committee here. And Bloomberg is reporting, and we heard from Sean Duffy earlier today, that the Artemis contract may be going up for bid, that there might be other companies other than SpaceX involved here. Is that the answer that's needed to finally get America back to the moon?
Well, listen, I don't know what NASA is going to do. I will say I think Sean Duffy is doing a fantastic job as the acting administrator. He's really dived into the role. And NASA, look, NASA is something that is near and dear to my heart. For the last 13 years, almost every single major piece of space-related legislation that's passed into law, I've either authored or co-authored it. And being a lifelong Houstonian, Johnson Space Center is right there. It matters enormously to Houston, it matters to Texas, and it matters to the whole country. One of the most important parts of the One Big Beautiful Bill that Donald Trump signed into law on the 4th of July is a provision that I wrote that funds $10 billion for NASA to go back to the moon. And it funds Artemis, it funds going back to the moon. And we're in a race. Look, there's a unifying theme behind all of the legislation that I'm fighting for in the Commerce Committee, and that is producing jobs and beating China. And we need to beat China going to the moon. China has stated they intend to go to the moon by 2030, and we cannot lose the race to the moon. In my view, if we wake up in a few years and see China on the moon, see China establishing a base on the moon, I think it would be a blow to America that would make Sputnik seem mild. And I'm going to do everything humanly possible to prevent that from happening. And I will say, Sean Duffy, I had dinner with Sean last week. I think he really is diving in and is committed. We will go to the moon and we will beat China. That is very good for America.
Senator Cruz, thanks so much for being with us. We'll see you back in Texas.
Look forward to it.